The technology to sharpen the images we create in the process of astrophotography has made amazing progress lately. Honestly, it's improved by logarithmic scales. And I'm not just referring to AI-based technology, such as RC Astro's famous blur exterminator, or Cosmic Clarity, or Graxpert's new AI-based sharpening tool. But a plethora of tools and techniques have become available which can sharpen and refine images to such a degree as would have been science fiction a mere decade ago. Some of them are more recent developments, such as the application of artificial intelligence to the sharpening process. And some of them aren't exactly sharpening tools, though they can effectively be applied to the process, such as Photolab's unique ClearView Plus tool. And when applied strategically, all these techniques can be brought together cohesively to create a comprehensive sharpening strategy that permits unprecedented levels of detail to be pulled out of an image. In today's video, we'll take a look at this, a procedure I think of as cohesive sharpening. Or in other words, simply getting any tool from various applications that can be applied to the sharpening process to work together. The image I am working with today is that of Melot 15, also known as LDN 1369. It's nearly always up and well positioned at my latitude, so it's a target I've been gathering photons of casually, shooting it in the minutes or hours while waiting for other, rarer targets to appear. And just yesterday I had noticed that I had accumulated 16.5 hours of integration, just a little bit more than that actually. And so I figured it was time to stack the information and turn this into an image. Now, this is my previous image of Melot 15. It was taken with an 81mm refractor with 450mm of focal length. And I like the image, but lacking focal length, fine detail simply cannot be resolved on the smaller structures. Plus, processing software simply was not then where it is now. Let's take a look at that global sharpening strategy applied to the much higher focal length image that we saw at the beginning of this video. I've just finished stacking 1001 60-second subs in PixInsight's weighted batch preprocessor, a process that took about 8 hours. And since I live at a dark sky site, I am working with LRGB as usual. The first thing that I always do with images after stacking is run the blur exterminator on them twice. First in the correct mode and then in the default mode. The correct mode helps to correct any aberrations that may appear in the stars, and the default mode deconvolves the stars and sharpens the non-stellar structures. Through experimentation, I have observed that I get better results by running the blur exterminator on each separate master. I do not ever combine them all together and then run blur exterminator. I know that takes more time, but like so many things in life, more time invested yields better quality. Once the images are sharpened with blur exterminator, I run star alignments on them, using the luminance plates as the reference. And when that's done, I run the red, green, and blue plates through the statistics tool and find the image that has the highest median. In this case, as is often the case, it was the red image. I'll then open the linear fit tool, use the red image as the reference image, and run linear fit on the green and blue plates to color balance them. I know some people find the next thing I'm going to say contentious, but I absolutely do not like and never use spectrophotometric color calibration. To me, it's a pointless exercise in futility. I'm going to modify the colors anyway in the process of editing. And to be honest, the exact coloration of the stellar structures often isn't very impressive. It's just various shades of red usually, or sometimes with certain reflection nebulae, blue or silver gray. And it's why people so often turn to false color modes such as SHO and HOO. Now I rarely ever use SHO and HOO myself, preferring to stick with the RGB color format. But there is a lot of leeway working within that format to sharpen up color details within an image. I've covered this in previous videos where I've analyzed the shortcomings of spectrophotometric color calibration, and explained why I always choose the older tool, linear fit, instead. Once linear fit has been run on the plates, I combine them using the channel combination tool to yield my RGB plate. I clone the RGB plate simply by left-clicking and dragging on its tab, and then I use the screen transfer function tool to stretch the histogram of the cloned plate. This is specifically to create a star plate. Once the cloned plate's histogram is stretched, I run the noise exterminator on it. This gives me a nicely denoised plate from which I am then going to extract the stars using the star exterminator. And that star plate is then saved as a lossless TIFF to be added back to the image later on. And the starless image that was made with the screen transfer function is discarded. I then use Star Exterminator to remove the stars from the original unstretched RGB plate and discard that star plate. Then I stretch its histogram using my method Perfect Histograms in 60 Seconds Evolved, which creates a low contrast plate ideal for developing in a layer-based photo editor outside of PixInsight. I then run the Noise Exterminator on this image. Noise Exterminator needs to be run, by the way, after the histogram is stretched. That's when you get the best results. Hence why I go about things this way. And that gets saved. Then I pretty much rinse and repeat on the Luminance Master. Except I rarely ever use the stars from the Luminance Master, so I don't tend to do the cloning part. I just remove the stars with the Star Exterminator from the Luminance Master, then stretch the histogram using the Perfect Histograms method, then denoise the plate and save it as a lossless TIFF. Now I have the basic information to go into the next step, layer-based photo editing, and I prefer to use Affinity Photo. I've used it for many years, and it's not only much more affordable than Adobe's Photoshop, which, though powerful, is frankly absurdly priced. But it does everything I need to do and plenty more. In fact, out of the decade or more that I've been using it, I really don't think I've ever used more than 10 or 15% of its functionality. And since I bought it when it was on sale for a one-time price of $50, it's more than worth it. But the first thing that I do in Affinity Photo is import all the plates. The next major step in regard to our purpose in this video, maximizing our ability to sharpen detail, is to separate the frequencies for both the L, or the luminance, and the RGB plates. So I have all the plates imported, and I've rotated them 90 degrees clockwise. I just find it easier to look at the spire this way. It doesn't make any actual difference for editing. It's just the way the optical side of my brain makes sense of things. So on the Luminance Master and the RGB Master, I'm going to run the frequency separation tool set to maximum on it. That's the slider pulled all the way over to 100 pixels. This will destroy the original luminance layer and RGB layer by tearing them in half into their constituent low frequency and high frequency components. It is useful to promptly rename the components to avoid confusion as you work. I just designate them each RGB LF and RGB HF for RGB low frequency and high frequency, and the same with the luminance plates, luminance LF and luminance HF. Now here's where it's going to become evident why it's so important to separate the frequencies. The high frequency information contains all the detail within an image. By separating it from the low frequency information, we can push the sharpening further without risk of creating artifacts in the low frequency information, which contains color, light, and shadow information. Now the first thing I'm going to do is do a synergistic sharpening operation on the high frequency information for the Luminance Master. The Luminance Master contains most of the image's sharpness information, not all of it, but a good chunk of it. And that's because the luminance filter is allowing all the visible light to pass through it and be collected on the camera sensor. Whereas the R, G, and B filters are each only allowing about 1/3 of the visible spectrum to fall on the sensor. And I'm going to begin synergistic sharpening by first opening the unsharp mask in the high frequency information of the luminance plate. I'll drag the radius slider to the right until the information is as sharp as I can get it before it begins to show the grittiness that indicates degradation of the information. And if necessary, I'll drag up the factor a little bit too, which thickens the boundaries in the sharpened information. It just makes it stand out a little better. Then I'll select the luminance high frequency information again, open a clarity tool, and drag the clarity tool up as far as I can, sharpening the image until I see degradation starting to happen, then backing off just a little bit. And then I'll do the exact same thing with the high pass filter. The only thing to remember with the high pass filter is it needs to be composited onto the information. Set the composite mode to soft light. It works best with astrophotography images. That completes the execution of synergistic sharpening on the high frequency information. Now one last thing to do is select the unsharp mask clarity tool and high pass filter, then the paintbrush and set it to full black. Create a small paintbrush with an opacity of 100, a flow of 100, and a hardness of 0. This makes a dense but soft brush, and run it around the edge of the entire image to remove the effect of the sharpening tools from the edge of the image. The edges of images usually have some distortion and degradation, and the sharpening process will only emphasize that. So, to minimize the amount that you have to crop after you're finished editing an image, it helps to just remove the effect of the sharpening tools from the edge of the image. After this, I use the levels, brightness, and curves tools to raise the brightness and the low frequency information. But that's outside the scope of this video. If you're interested, let me know and we'll cover that in another video. And before moving on to the next step, select the luminance low frequency information and change the composite mode in this window right here to luminosity. This will cause the luminance master's information to be added to the RGB information, and importantly, the luminosity composite mode adds it in such a way that respects the bright so they do not get blown out, while adding dark information to the dark areas even if it's too dark for you to see. In other words, the luminosity mode preserves all the information. We'll then go to the RGB high frequency information and do nearly the same procedure there. There is one significant difference, however. I'm going to leave the luminance information, both the high frequency and the low frequency, turned on. This is because as I sharpen the high frequency RGB information, I want to see how that sharpening adds into what is already there. I find that to be the most effective way to make sure that you get the best combined sharpening effect. When that's all done, be sure to select the unsharp mask, clarity tool, and high pass filter again, and paint out their effects from the edge of the image, just like we did with the luminance master. In this way, we build the synergistic sharpening capability of Affinity Photo onto the sharpening capability of the RC Astro tool, Blur Exterminator. Now it's time to move on to the next tool in the arsenal, Photolab 8. It has a number of features that allow it to go about further sharpening in its own unique ways, and it can carry the sharpening that we have already been able to accomplish with AI-based sharpening with the Blur Exterminator, or some other tool, like, for example, you may choose to use Cosmic Clarity, and the synergistic sharpening we've accomplished in Affinity Photo, and further adds to that. However, and this next part is very important, if, in the course of developing in Photolab 8, you also do any stretching or brightening, Photolab 8, like many of these developing tools, will brighten any luminance and chrominance noise left in the image as well as the signal. And that can lead to outcomes like this. See all those that look like speckles of glitter within the Horsehead Nebula structure there? That's luminance noise that has been stretched into greater brightness while also stretching the dark nebula structure of the Horsehead. To prevent this, it's important to once again scour the image for any potential noise, because while a developing tool like Photolab is extremely powerful when it comes to brightening an image and refining its color, contrast, and other details, it will not distinguish between the image you want to work on and the noise within it, and thus may happily brighten any luminance and chrominance noise that may yet linger in the image. If you're familiar with Photolab 8, you'll know that its Deep Prime noise removal software is almost legendary. However, unfortunately, it only works on RAW images. FITS files have similarities, but they aren't RAW. So they aren't at this time a format Photolab works on. So get any lingering noise out of there before moving on. This isn't hard. You can either export the image as a lossless TIFF and then run your AI-based noise extermination software on it, or Noise Exterminator works as a plugin within Affinity Photo, and I think also Photoshop. I'm not sure, I haven't used Photoshop in ages. But you can just merge all the visible layers within Affinity Photo and then run the Noise Exterminator on the new pixel layer. In which case, when that's done, export it as a lossless TIFF and then open it in Photolab 8. We're now in Photolab. Photolab gives us a lot of tools with which we can refine the detail within an image. On the Light tab, you have the ClearView Plus tool, which is a very sophisticated contrast tool that appears to combine the features of contrast and microcontrast with an unsharp mask and possibly a clarity tool function. It, however, is very powerful, and you need to increase it carefully, otherwise an image will quickly degrade. Especially astro images, which are very sensitive because they're shot in such low light. But used well, it is a key aspect of sharpening in Photolab 8. Now just below that, you have the contrast, microcontrast, and fine contrast tools. And since sharpening is essentially a process of increasing contrast, these tools make excellent sharpening options. Particularly the fine contrast tool, which is excellent for enhancing subtle detail within an image. But, like the ClearView tool, it's also very powerful, so use it judiciously. Now in this tab, all these tools are applied globally. You can apply these tools to discrete areas of the image, defined in very useful and specific ways within the Local Adjustments tab all the way on the right. We're now in the Local Adjustments window, and once again here, you can see the ClearView Plus tool. And we also have at our disposal several other sharpening tools. These include both contrast and microcontrast. The microcontrast tool is very similar to the fine contrast tool to be found on the Light tab. And further down the column out of sight, there's also a sharpness tool. My general order of operations in Photolab 8 is I'll first go to the Light tab and select DxO Smart Lighting, which will intelligently apply lighting to the entire image, doing a wonderful job of evening up the brightness throughout the image, yet amazingly avoid leaving the image looking flat and uninteresting. I will then go to the Local Adjustments page and make specific adjustments to various regions of the image, refining their brightness, shadow, color, and definition. The first thing to do in the Local Adjustments tab is select what region you want to work on. You can define this by hue, brightness, graduated filter, which is kind of like a horizon, which rarely ever applies to astrophotography, control line and paintbrush, which sometimes apply, and the control point tool, which intelligently applies selections to areas that you define with circles. I started out by using a hue mask to define the dark blue areas within the image, and I'm going to lift their brightness and lighten the color to draw out a more pleasing but not overwhelming cyan hue. Now let's get to sharpening. I'm going to apply control points to the center of the image where the most detail is. Photolab 8's algorithm, I'm not sure if it's AI or not, it's definitely very clever. Quickly and almost always perfectly recognizes the relevant areas to work on. I can increase the size of those control points to cover all the relevant material or just add more control points around the image. And I can adjust exactly what those control points affect by changing the luminance and chroma sliders, which tells the control points what luminance and colors to favor within the control point circles. Once I have that done, I'll begin the sharpening procedure. The way I will go about this depends on the demands of the image, but usually I will begin by increasing the contrast till I feel the play of light and shadow enhances the detail, and then I'll increase the micro contrast, which really brings out the fine structure. When that's done, I'll go up to ClearView Plus and slowly move it up to further refine the detail. ClearView Plus also plays on contrast and will further enhance the distinction between all light and shadow. If the image still seems like it could benefit from even finer detail refinement, I'll go down to the sharpness slider and drag it up till I have the detail I'm looking for. I will typically drag each of the sliders up till I see the first hint of degradation, and then drag the sliders back down a couple points till the degradation goes away. I'll also use the tone sliders to adjust the lighting within the relevant areas as I work, because the appearance of enhanced sharpness is heavily dependent on the quality of the lighting. When that's all done, I'll pop over to the Detail tab and use Photolab 8's brilliantly implemented unsharp mask to globally enhance the appearance of detail throughout the entire image. I'm not using that term brilliantly implemented arbitrarily, by the way. Photolab 8's implementation of the unsharp mask appears to have all the benefits of Affinity Photo's discrete unsharp mask clarity tool and high-pass filters combined. And the algorithm is very intelligent. It doesn't degrade the edges of an image, and you have to push it really hard to degrade an image at all. The one flaw that I can see that it does have is if there is any lingering noise in the image whatsoever once you begin these procedures in Photolab 8. Increasing the brightness and application of the sharpening tools, especially the unsharp mask, will concentrate and brighten the noise, giving you the glitter effect that you saw in the horsehead image earlier. When I have the detail, color, and brightness to my liking in Photolab 8, I'll export the image back to Affinity Photo where I'll add back the stars. Then I'll export the complete image once again as a lossless TIFF and open it up one last time in PixInsight, where I can once again run the Blur Exterminator on it. For this round of sharpening, I'll drag the Blur Exterminator Sharpen Star slider all the way down to 0, and reduce the Sharpen Non-Stellar Structure slider to about 0.15. In some circumstances though, rather than exporting to PixInsight to use the Blur Exterminator, I may just apply a second pass of Affinity Photo's sharpening tools, especially the unsharp mask, globally over all layers below the star layers. Particularly if I find the Blur Exterminator is creating any glitches in the images. Sometimes when you push the Blur Exterminator a little too hard, you'll get some artifacts that look like very tiny patches of color, almost unnoticeable when the image is at its full size, but if you zoom in, they become visible. That didn't happen here, so I'm happy with the Blur Exterminator's outcome. And this leaves us with this final image of Melot 15, which I like to think of as the Wizard Spire. A beautiful, unique, and fascinating structure and open star cluster in the heart of the Heart Nebula. If you would like to see the full resolution version, you can see it at the Sky Story Astrobin. The link is provided in the description below. To recap, what we're doing in this video is getting the sharpening tools from various applications to work cohesively, even though they perhaps were not meant to. I find that this is best done by first applying your AI-based sharpening tool. For me, that's the Blur Exterminator. And that has to be done in PixInsight because, insofar as I know, it's the only place where the Blur Exterminator works. Then, in my layer-based photo editor, in my case that's Affinity Photo, I export RGB and L masters separately, separate each of those masters into the component high and low frequency information, and then apply Affinity Photo's 3 discrete sharpening tools, the unsharp mask, the clarity tool, and the high pass filter to the high frequency information from the separate L and RGB high frequency plates. After that's done, I run the image again through AI-based denoising software, because in the next and final step, any lingering noise would be amplified along with the signal. Then, I move on for finishing work into Photolab, where I can make very precise and accurate adjustments to light and color, and further refine the image's sharpness by applying Photolab's various and exceedingly powerful contrast tools, its rather unique ClearView Plus tool, and its own very special implementation of its unsharp mask. Thus, all these unique sharpening tools from individual applications are made to work together. As always, thank you for watching, and if you have any thoughts or observations, please leave them in the comments section below. Now it's clear skies here tonight, and with any luck, I hope to finally be able to finish my Horsehead Nebula project. And I'm sure you have projects of your own, so get out there and shoot that sky.